George Russell put Mercedes on pole in Barcelona, and the celebration lasted only until the first question hit the paddock. What if that lap is not safe? Because this was not just a driver beating Lewis Hamilton by a tiny margin. This was Mercedes finding speed again, in a season where its engine, its electrical power, its qualifying tricks, and even its front wing have already been dragged into the spotlight. And here is the dangerous part. There is no confirmed ruling that Russell's pole was illegal. But Formula One does not need a verdict to start a war. When rivals see Mercedes win by hundredths, after months of technical scrutiny, they do not just ask how fast the car is. They ask what is hidden inside it. If Russell's pole stands, Mercedes may have just proved it is smarter than everyone else in the new era. But if the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile finds one detail that crosses the line, one setting, one loophole, one rule stretched too far, Barcelona could become the lap that puts Mercedes' entire advantage at risk. Subscribe to the channel. The first layer of this story is simple. Barcelona did not make Mercedes suspicious. Mercedes arrived in Barcelona already suspicious. That is why George Russell's pole became so explosive so quickly. It was not only about the lap time. It was not only about beating Lewis Hamilton. It was not only about putting a Mercedes at the front when the championship pressure was already rising. It was about the history attached to that car. Because all season, the silver arrows have been followed by the same uncomfortable question. Where is the speed really coming from? And that question matters more now than it would have in an older Formula One era. The sport has changed. The cars are not just mechanical monsters anymore. They are rolling systems of power, energy, software, heat, recovery, and timing. A car can look normal from the outside and still be doing something extremely clever inside. That is what makes this new era so dangerous. The fastest advantage is not always the one fans can see. Sometimes it is not a wing flexing. It is not a driver sliding the rear through a corner. It is not a dramatic engine sound or a visible change on the car. Sometimes the advantage is hidden in how energy arrives. When it arrives. How long it lasts. And whether the car keeps pushing at the exact moment another car begins to fade. That is why Russell's pole was instantly placed under a different kind of spotlight. If this had been a normal season, people would have called it a brilliant lap and moved on. Russell was quick. Hamilton was close. Antonelli was behind. Mercedes had done the job. But this season, nothing around Mercedes feels that simple. Before Barcelona, rivals had already raised concerns about the Mercedes power unit. The question was not just whether the engine passed inspection when it was cold and separated from the chaos of the track. The deeper question was how it behaved when it was hot, alive, and under full pressure. That distinction is important. A car part can look legal in one condition and behave differently in another. And in Formula One, that difference can be everything. Think of it like checking a door when the house is quiet, then discovering it expands when the room heats up and suddenly does not fit the frame the same way. The door did not look suspicious at first. But under real conditions, the story changes. That was the concern rivals had with Mercedes. Not proof of guilt. Not a confirmed Barcelona violation. Concern. And in Formula One, concern is powerful because it usually starts before the public sees anything. It starts with engineers comparing data. It starts with rival teams watching acceleration traces. It starts when someone looks at a speed difference and says, "That does not match what we expected." That sentence is where technical storms begin. And Mercedes had already been through more than one. The engine questions were only the beginning. The bigger controversy came from electrical power, and that is where the story connects directly to qualifying. Because the modern Formula One car is not just pushed by combustion power. It is pushed by recovered electrical energy, stored and released with incredible precision. That energy can give the car a vital burst when the lap needs it most. For a casual fan, imagine two runners approaching the finish line. One runner has to ease off slightly before the line. The other finds a way to keep driving forward for a fraction longer. That fraction may look tiny. But in Formula One, that fraction can be pole position. This is why the motor generator unit kinetic became so controversial. The name sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It is part of the hybrid system that helps turn recovered energy into speed. And under the rules, that electrical power could not be used freely all the way through the end of a qualifying lap. There had to be a reduction. The car could not just blast full electrical power through the timing line without limitation. But Mercedes and Red Bull found a way to use an emergency shutdown function in a way that raised serious concerns. That function was meant to protect the car. It was meant for real problems. It was not meant to be a secret performance button. And yet, by triggering it in a certain way, teams could avoid the normal power reduction and gain valuable hundredths at the end of the lap. That is why rival teams reacted. Because hundredths are not small when the front row is separated by almost nothing. Hundredths are the difference between attacking the first corner from clean air and staring at another driver's rear wing. Hundredths are the difference between pressure and control. Hundredths are the difference between a normal qualifying result and a political explosion. And in Barcelona, Russell beat Hamilton by the exact kind of margin that makes everybody remember those hundredths. That is the danger. The pole did not need to look impossible to become controversial. It only needed to look decisive by a tiny amount, after months of questions about how Mercedes finds tiny amounts. That is what made the reaction so immediate. Rivals were not looking at Russell in isolation. They were looking at the full Mercedes pattern. Power unit questions. Electrical deployment controversy. Technical directives. Front wing scrutiny. Qualifying strength. Each one of those details adds pressure to the next. And by the time Russell crossed the line fastest in Barcelona, the car was already carrying the weight of all of them. That is brutal for Russell, because the driver still has to do the work. He still has to trust the car through every corner. He still has to brake late, turn cleanly, manage the tires, and stay calm when the entire lap is balancing on a knife edge. A controversial car does not drive itself to pole. But in Formula One, the driver's brilliance and the car's legality are tied together. If the car is trusted, the lap is celebrated. If the car is questioned, the lap is examined. And Mercedes is no longer a team whose fast laps are simply celebrated. They are examined. That is the first real problem behind Barcelona. Not that Russell's pole has been proven illegal. It has not. The problem is that Mercedes has become the kind of team where every major result now invites a second conversation. The first conversation is about performance. The second is about whether that performance sits safely inside the rules. And those two conversations can fight each other. Because if Mercedes is fully legal, then this is a masterpiece of engineering. It means the team understood the new era better than Ferrari, Red Bull, McLaren, and everyone chasing them. It means Russell's pole is not a scandal. It is a warning. But if even one detail is found to be outside the line, or if one interpretation gets closed by another directive, then the meaning of the lap changes instantly. It stops being only a sporting moment. It becomes evidence. That is why Barcelona feels so tense. Because the lap itself may survive. The result may stand. Russell may keep pole. But the scrutiny around Mercedes is not going away, because the suspicion is now bigger than one weekend. It is about whether the silver arrows are simply operating at the limit of genius, or whether the limit itself is about to move. But the second layer is where the story becomes much more dangerous for Mercedes. Because this is no longer just about rivals asking, where did the lap time come from? Now the question is whether the governing body has already seen enough patterns to start tightening the net again. That distinction matters. A rival complaint is pressure. A technical directive is action. And Mercedes has already felt what happens when the sport moves from whispers to action. The electrical shutdown controversy was the clearest warning. Mercedes and Red Bull had found a way to use an emergency function inside the hybrid system, a function that was supposed to protect the car when something went wrong. But in qualifying, it could help avoid the normal reduction of electrical power near the timing line. That sounds small. It was not. Because the end of a qualifying lap is where everything becomes cruel. The tires are tired. The driver is exposed. The car is right on the edge. And if one team can keep stronger electrical power alive for just a little longer, that tiny difference can become the entire front row. This is why the governing body stepped in. The message was clear. That emergency function was for real technical problems, not for performance. It could not be used as a clever shortcut at the end of a lap. And to make sure teams would not treat the rule like a suggestion, the penalty became severe. If the system shut down, it would be locked out for a full minute. That one detail changed everything. Because a full minute in Formula One is not a punishment. It is a disaster. It means the trick becomes useless. It means any team trying to use it deliberately risks destroying its own lap, or worse, compromising the race itself. So on paper, the loophole was closed. But here is the part that Mercedes cannot escape. When a loophole is closed because of you, people do not stop looking at you. They look harder. That is exactly what happened. The silver arrows did not only become fast. They became interesting to the rulemakers. And in Formula One, being interesting to the rulemakers is dangerous, because it means every clever solution is now viewed through a different lens. Before, Mercedes could say, this is innovation. After the directive, rivals could say, this is a pattern. That is the shift that makes Barcelona so important. Russell's pole arrived after the sport had already changed the rules around a qualifying-related advantage. Not years before. Not in some old controversy nobody remembers. This season. In this same technical era. Around the same kind of hidden performance that can decide a lap by hundredths. And then Russell beat Hamilton by hundredths. That is why the paddock did not simply move on. The margin was too perfect for suspicion. Not because a tiny gap proves anything illegal. It does not. But because a tiny gap makes every invisible advantage feel enormous. If the gap is half a second, people talk about car performance. If the gap is a few hundredths, people talk about details. And details are where Mercedes has been living all season. The engine questions were about details. How the power unit behaves cold compared with hot. What happens under real track stress. Whether performance stays inside the limits when the car is not sitting still, but being pushed to the edge. The electrical controversy was about details. How power reduces near the line. What an emergency function is allowed to do. Whether the intent of the rule matters as much as the written words. The front wing scrutiny was about details. How much a part moves. Whether flexibility becomes performance. Whether something legal in one test still creates an advantage on track. None of these are simple conversations. And that is exactly why they are so powerful. A simple illegal part is easy to understand. It either passes or fails. But a clever interpretation is more dangerous. It lives in the space between what the rule says, what the rule meant, and what the car actually does at speed. Mercedes has been operating in that space. And Barcelona has pushed that space back into the spotlight. For Russell, this creates a strange kind of pressure. He may have driven the lap of his weekend. He may have done everything asked of him. He may have delivered exactly when Mercedes needed him most. But the moment the lap becomes tied to technical scrutiny, his achievement starts to share the stage with suspicion. That is not just uncomfortable. It is unfair, in a very Formula One way. Because drivers are celebrated as heroes when the machine is trusted, but questioned as passengers when the machine is doubted. Russell can brake later than Hamilton. He can carry more speed through a corner. He can nail the final sector. But if the car underneath him is already under a cloud, the first reaction from rivals will not always be, "What a lap." It will be, "What is the car doing?" That is why Mercedes must be careful now. They do not just need the result to stand. They need the explanation to hold. If the governing body asks for more data, Mercedes has to provide it. If rivals push for clarification, Mercedes has to stay calm. If another technical directive appears, Mercedes has to show that Russell's performance did not depend on something that is about to be removed. Because that is the hidden danger of new scrutiny. The result can remain legal, while the advantage that created it gets weakened later. That has happened before in Formula One. A team finds something. The governing body studies it. The result stands. But the rule is clarified, and suddenly the car loses the tiny edge that made it special. That is what rivals may really want. They may not need Russell's pole to be deleted. They may only need Mercedes' advantage to be reduced before it becomes decisive in the championship. And that is where politics enters the story. Ferrari has every reason to push. Hamilton was almost on pole. If the difference between first and second was just a few hundredths, Ferrari will want to understand every detail of where Mercedes found the gap. Red Bull has every reason to push. Earlier in the season, Verstappen had already questioned whether the Mercedes speed was just a good engine, or something else. McLaren has every reason to push. Any team close enough to fight near the front cannot afford to let a hidden advantage survive unchecked. This is how pressure builds. Not from one protest. From several teams quietly agreeing that something needs another look. And once multiple rivals start circling the same issue, the governing body is almost forced to listen. That does not mean Mercedes is guilty. But it means Mercedes is exposed. And exposure matters. Because even if every check comes back clean, the process itself creates tension. The team has to answer questions. The engineers have to defend interpretations. The drivers have to respond to headlines. Wolff has to choose his words carefully, because one wrong phrase can make a technical issue sound like a scandal. This is why Toto Wolff's role becomes so delicate. He has to protect the team without sounding defensive. He has to celebrate Russell without acting like the controversy is imaginary. He has to respect the governing body while also making clear that Mercedes believes its car is within the rules.